Hi guys, it's me ChazorHD and welcome back to the channel and welcome to the ninth race of the 2023 Formula 1 season as we come to the Red Bull ring for that ninth race for the Austrian Grand Prix of 2023. Great to have you guys here again. Hopefully you've had a good couple weeks since the last race. Obviously we're now back to Europe for the F1 season and we will be staying in Europe until the start of September, which will be the final race of the European season in Italy. And of course, this weekend is going to be, forgetting the weather for a moment, purely just looking at the format for the weekend, it's going to be a bit of a chaotic weekend because it is the second sprint weekend of the season. So yeah, the format is going to be quite a bit different from what we've seen in the last few races. Obviously, we'll have qualifying on the Friday, which will set the grid for Sunday's race, and then we will have sprint qualifying, which will set the grid on Saturday. That session will take place. We'll set the grid later for that day for the sprint race. So yeah, we'll have all of that going on, and looking at the weather, looks like there's a pretty good chance of rain for pretty much every session this weekend. So it's going to be a very topsy-turvy weekend. Very hard to predict, really, I think, this weekend's race, given, with the weather, how that's going to play its role. But also, with how close the field is right now, even in dry conditions, I think it is a bit hard to predict, honestly. So, yeah, it's going to be a very exciting weekend, I think. Maybe not an absolute all-time classic weekend or an all-time classic race on Sunday, but it's going to be similar to what we saw, say, in Montreal, or even, a couple of weeks before that in Barcelona. Going to be a very, not up and down weekend, but just in terms of where the teams and drivers are position-wise, it's going to be really all over the place. It's not going to be, team by team by team like we've seen in the past. I definitely don't think that will be the case. And of course, for this Austrian Grand Prix coverage on the channel, we're kicking it off tonight with the weekend preview. And of course, what we do in the weekend preview is get into the track itself that we're racing around, get into some data regarding it. And then, obviously, I'll get into my initial predictions for the weekend, going into qualifying on the race, and how I think it will play out on both of those ends. We'll also go through the teams and get into a bit more detail as to how I think their performance will be this weekend around this type of circuit. And I will also get into something else which is very important, of course, car upgrades. There is 2 or 3 upgrades this weekend, which definitely could be quite important. Definitely a big upgrade at McLaren you guys will be interested to see, which is part of the upgrade that McLaren have been hyping up since the start of the season. And it is really big fundamental changes to their car. And I'll get onto that, like I said, later on in the stream. Only Lando Norris will be running that new upgraded package of McLaren, so we'll see how much better they are for it. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing in tonight's weekend preview. And yeah, of course, throughout the weekend, I will be bringing you plenty of coverage of the Austrian Grand Prix. And just a quick reminder of what that coverage looks like. So tomorrow, I'll be live for 3 hours from 2:30 PM UK time till 5:30 PM. The qualifying watch-along. Qualifying begins at 4 PM. So it'll be an hour and a half's build-up to the session. And then on Saturday, I'll be doing an F2 sprint race watch-along and then build-up and a watch-along for the F1 sprint race as well on Saturday. And I'll be live beginning at 12:30 PM UK time all the way through until 4:30 PM. So, yeah, those are the times for Saturday. And then on Sunday will be the usual, going live 2 hours before the race starts, building up to the race, watching along the race, and then doing a reaction as well. And I think the timings for Sunday's stream is me going live at 12 PM UK time all the way through until, probably about 4:30 PM, just like on Saturday. So yeah, that's the plan for the content this weekend. There won't be a Monday stream, by the way, and the reason that is because we have a back-to-back. Of course, next weekend is the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. So the next Monday stream, the day after a Grand Prix, will be the day after the British Grand Prix instead. Really just to look at really how the teams have progressed and what's happened in these two races coming up. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the weekend. Looking forward to it very much because normally in Austria, we do tend to get quite a mixed grid at times, a mixed bag a lot of the time, and quite a few exciting moments and very exciting races as well. So yeah, I am looking forward to it. And you know, if you look at how these cars were at this circuit last year, we got a pretty good race. We got a surprising win from Ferrari. The reason it was surprising is we didn't think they would be as quick as they were. They were quite comfortably quicker than Red Bull. And we also had a great midfield fight. Lots of overtaking, lots of action. And let's hope we get that again, whether it's dry or wet. Before, though, we get into the race weekend, let me just quickly touch on the championship standings. Of course, I did touch on this the day after the Canadian Grand Prix, but in case you guys don't know what the standings are, let me go through it again. So Max Verstappen is how many points? 69 points, I think it is. Is it 69 points? Yes, it is. 69 points clear of Sergio Perez in second. Perez, though, only 9 points clear of Fernando Alonso behind in third, with Lewis Hamilton in fourth. And yeah, Perez seriously under threat now for second in the championship. Carlos Sainz is up to fifth because of Russell's retirement in Canada. And Russell, yeah, dropping now to sixth. Leclerc not too far behind in seventh. Lance Stroll is in eighth with Esteban Ocon in P9. And Pierre Gasly just about in P10 in the Drivers' Championship. And then on the constructors' side, Red Bull massively clear of Mercedes, almost, I think, 160 points clear. They are of the Mercedes team. Mercedes, though, despite, you know, finishing on the podium, which was a good result for them, Aston Martin, with their better showing in Canada than what we expected, obviously their new upgrade really helped them. Yeah, Aston Martin made some good progress in Canada, not just with their pace, but also when it came to, or when it comes to, rather, the battle for second in the championship, because they brought the gap down to just 13 points between the two teams in the fight for second. Ferrari also having a good weekend in Canada when it comes to, well, not a good weekend, but a good race result. You know, scoring 22 points, and they are now only 45 points behind Mercedes in second. Ferrari are a lot more confident now than they were, you know, say a month ago. And after their tyre test and the work they've done to understand how the car performs on its tyres and the upgrades they've made, Ferrari do seem just a bit better than what we saw, yeah, this time last month. So that is great to see. And I think Ferrari are going to have quite a competitive weekend here in Austria. And probably between now and the end of the European season, I think Ferrari will make not massive, but definitely some gains on second in the championship if they keep up the much improved pace we saw in Canada in the dry, at least. Alpine are clearly in fifth place with McLaren in sixth. Alfa Romeo are in seventh now, ahead of the Haas team, who are down to eighth. Obviously, very close fight there between Alfa Romeo and Haas. Williams up to ninth and only 1 point behind Haas and 2 points behind Alfa Romeo. And with Williams' new upgrade, which of course both of their drivers will now have for this weekend's race. Obviously, Albon in Canada only had the new upgraded package. Williams should be moving on up in 2023. So yeah, we'll see if Williams can maybe grab another couple points this weekend to rise up in the championship even further. And last in the championship, Alpha Tauri, who definitely, I feel as though have deserved a bit more points than what they've had this season. Only 2 points in total, but their car has been pretty bad, to be honest, the car they produced for 2023. So can't really argue with them being, right down there in the championship. So let's now, before we go on to the teams and how I respectively think they'll do, let's just quickly look at the track map. For anyone, obviously, that is new to Formula One, the Red Bull Ring, of course, is a very fast and very quick circuit in terms of the lap time. The lap times here at the Red Bull Ring are the lowest that you will see, or one of the lowest you'll see on the entire calendar. Pole position normally only just above 1 minute. And yeah, if you look at the first sector, which is, from the start-finish line through the Niki Lauda curve and right up to turn 3, it is, pretty basic. It's all really about straight line speed when it comes to that first sector. The middle sector also is mostly about your straight line speed. And then when it comes to the final sector, which is the final, say, 4 corners, I think it is, of the circuit, as they go through, I think, is it pronounced Wurt, and then into Rindt, and then the Red Bull Mobile corner, that, being the final sector. Really, it's about, your performance through high-speed corners, but it is a very high-speed circuit, and it definitely suits cars that, one, have a very powerful engine or a very slippery car in a straight line with their aerodynamic design. But if you don't necessarily have the best car in that area, if you do have a very good car through high-speed corners, then you're going to have a good time, at least in the final sector. So yeah, really all about high speed at this circuit. Now, given the amount of upgrades we've seen in the last, couple races, and also given that this circuit is quite different to the last 2 or 3 racetracks we've been to, for this weekend preview, I've decided not to do any comparisons to any of the sectors for this circuit, because it is pretty hard to compare sectors we've recently been to, or not sectors we've recently been to, tracks we've recently been to, and the certain sectors that are at those tracks. It's hard to compare them to the sectors at this circuit. The first sector, like I said, all about straight line speed. The second sector, it has 2 or 3 corners, 2 of them being slow, but really is about straight line speed again. And then the final sector is effectively about your performance at high speed. Maybe you could compare the final sector here in Austria to the final sector in Barcelona, but I don't think it's quite the same, because in Barcelona, 2 of the final, or not 2 of the final 4, but 2 of the 4 corners in the final sector in Spain are not necessarily slow corners, but they are quite a bit slower than the corners in the final sector at the Red Bull Ring. So yeah, it's not really comparable to a track we've been to recently that would give a good representation of who should be quick in what areas of the track. Of course, we do know certain teams in 2023 have very good straight line speed, such as Red Bull, Ferrari, Williams, Alpine, Haas, Alfa Romeo to a certain degree. And then obviously, your teams like Aston Martin, Mercedes, McLaren, definitely a lot weaker on that front. So you need to think in terms of that when it comes to who will be properly competitive this weekend. So yeah, we'll see, of course, how that all plays out. But I'm definitely expecting this track to really be about, the straight line speed of the cars, and also what drivers can absolutely commit through the final sector and somehow get a bit extra lap time out of their out of their cars and out of themselves to just about nip ahead of a couple cars on the grid. Of course, with it being a short lap, the drivers do make, quite a bit of difference when it is such a short lap. And obviously the gaps between the cars are so short as well. But really, yeah, when it comes to the cars, it's about straight line speed. We'll see who does, well on that front this weekend. Of course, if it is dry, then we'll be able to get a good indication as to this weekend who has good grunt down the straights of, going into the Niki Lauda curve, then going up to turn 3, then up, down to turn 4, etc., etc. Now, let me get into my predictions coming into the weekend. Firstly, my qualifying prediction. I just do need to say, though, these two predictions for qualifying and the race is based on if it is dry. I've not done these predictions based on if it's a wet session. Because if it's a wet session, honestly, I think it's too hard at the minute to predict. It might be a bit easier tomorrow to predict a wet qualifying. Maybe even a wet race, but yeah, I think at the minute, given we've had no running obviously so far, it's too hard to predict what could happen in the wet. Also, just to clarify, I have not done a prediction for the sprint race for a couple reasons. One, because of the way the sprint day works, a part of the weekend format, again, it's a bit too hard to predict how it's going to play out necessarily. And obviously the weather is going to play quite an important role when it comes to what happens in the sprint race on Saturday. And secondly, I don't really care what happens in the sprint race on Saturday because... And one thing that the Liberty Media have done that has made the sprint format, even worse now is because now the sprint race itself does not decide the grid for Sunday's race. It's taken the jeopardy out of that particular event. And also, really because of that, the sprint race doesn't mean anything anymore. And it's really all about Friday qualifying and the Sunday race. And, the sprint day is great. You can score some extra points, but it doesn't really matter that much. So, yeah, even though I will be covering it, I'm not going to hide my, my opinions when it comes to the sprint format and all of that stuff. Anyway, let's get into my predictions. So for a dry qualifying, this is for qualifying on Friday, which of course will decide the grid for Sunday's race, like we saw in Baku. That's the new sprint format. I believe Charles Leclerc will take pole position for Ferrari, just about ahead of Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. The reason I believe that is because I do genuinely think Ferrari have improved after their tyre test, and I think they understand more about their new upgrade. Obviously, they've got a new side pod design that we saw back in Spain. I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And yeah, now they've understood it more. They know how to get the best out of it, and the drivers seem a lot more confident. I think Ferrari in the dry, on low fuel, I think have got a quick enough car to be definitely getting pole position and probably winning the sprint as well. For the race on the Sunday on heavy fuel, different story it could be. Max Verstappen will still be very close, obviously. Verstappen is amazing around this circuit, so you can't count him out for being right up there around this track, even if Red Bull aren't quite, miles ahead of the rest of the field. Carlos Sainz will be in third, and if that was, or if this prediction was to play out how I think it will, then it would just, confirm, Ferrari's improvements from that upgrade. And how, they've definitely got a more competitive package right now. And then, for the rest of the field, I've gone George Russell in 4th, Fernando Alonso 5th, Hamilton 6th, Perez 7th, Ocon 8th, Norris 9th, and Gasly 10th. Now, the reason I've gone with Russell ahead of Alonso and Hamilton is because, one, I believe Mercedes, in qualifying at least, will be quicker than Aston Martin around this track, because Mercedes have tended this season to have a slightly better straight line speed than Aston Martin. And also, George Russell does have, personally for him, a very good record here at the Red Bull Ring. And this is one of his strongest circuits. He was dominant here in F2. I think even in GP3, he was very good here. Was very good here for Williams. Last year, he qualified, I think, 4th, for this Grand Prix, and did finish, I think, in 4th place in the sprint. In the race, he missed out on the podium and finished behind Hamilton. Really, because he picked up damage, I think, on the first lap. I can't remember exactly what the damage was caused by, but yeah, he had to pit a bit earlier than planned because of that. But yeah, I think he will be the quicker Mercedes driver this weekend, because with Lewis Hamilton, this is not one of Lewis's best circuits. This is one of his weaker tracks. If you remember with, Valtteri Bottas would consistently be right on his pace, if not quicker than him. And even, with Rosberg, a couple times was faster than Hamilton at the Red Bull Ring. So yeah, I think Russell will be the main man for Mercedes this weekend. Alonso will obviously still be up there. Aston Martin have definitely made the improvements to put them a bit closer to, the real top teams in Formula One. No doubt about that. So yeah, Hamilton will be then in 6th place. The reason I've gone Perez in 7th is because 2 reasons. One, his confidence is gone. He has no confidence whatsoever. And I think around this track, that will continue this weekend. And obviously there'll be a lot of pressure on him this weekend to step up at Red Bull's home race. And that pressure might just get to him. But also, if you guys didn't know, Perez did not attend the media day today because, because he was ill. Now, whether he will still be too ill to drive, possibly tomorrow or whatever, we'll see. But if he's still well enough to drive, but not quite 100%, then I think that'll have definitely quite a negative effect on Sergio Perez's weekend. So, yeah, that's why I've gone Perez down in P7. Ocon, I'm going in 8th. I think Alpine will be best of the rest, really, after the top 4 teams. Lando Norris, the reason I've gone with him up in 9th is for 2 reasons. One, Lando has always been super quick at the Red Bull Ring. If you actually look at his record in the races here at the Red Bull Ring, Lando has finished in the top 6 of every race in Austria in F1 since 2019, except for last year's race. In 2019, he was 6th. In the 2 2020 races, he was 3rd and 5th. And then in 2021, he was 5th and 3rd. And then, last year finished in 7th. So he's always been just amazing at this track. You could argue Lando is actually the best driver on the grid for this circuit, given just how amazing he's been in cars that are not that great. So yeah, Lando, watch out for him this weekend. He will definitely be very, very strong. And especially if it does rain, I expect Lando Norris to have a very good weekend if that was to happen. And Pierre Gasly will round up the top 10. Really because Alpine, again, I think will be best of the rest after those top 4 teams. So that's what my predictions are when it comes to a dry qualifying session. Now let's get into the race prediction. Again, this is my prediction for the race. If it is a dry race, I think Max Verstappen will win the race just about by 3 seconds from Charles Leclerc. Ferrari's race pace, I do believe, will once again show to have improved quite a bit on what we've seen previously. But Max in that Red Bull will just be enough of a combination for him to win the race. But it will be a close fight, in my opinion. Charles Leclerc will finish in 2nd. Carlos Sainz will be 3rd. That'll be, if they were to get that Ferrari, that'd be 33 points at least. That would be an amazing result for them and put them really, on the coattails of Aston Martin and Mercedes. Fernando Alonso, I think, will finish in 4th because the Aston Martin car, when it comes to race pace, is clearly faster right now. There is no doubt about that. George Russell will be 5th, just ahead of Hamilton in 6th. I mean, if they were to finish 5th and 6th in the race, Mercedes, that'd still be a good result. That's still 18 points, and this is not going to be one of their stronger tracks because, again, of the weakness they have when it comes to their straight line speed. Sergio Perez, I think, will finish in 7th place, with Esteban Ocon 8th, Gasly 9th, and Lando Norris will just about hold off say, I don't know, a Lance Stroll or a Bottas or even an Alex Albon in the Williams to grab the final point from the Austrian Grand Prix. Let me know, guys, in the chat whether you agree or disagree with my predictions for qualifying of the race, and I'll get to your comments soon. There is also a poll running in the chat right now, which, let me read out the question for the poll. It says, what team is most likely to challenge Red Bull this weekend at the Austrian Grand Prix? And the options are Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin. So let me know in that poll, who do you think is most likely to put up a fight against the Red Bull team? In my opinion, it's Ferrari. But if you disagree, let me know in that poll, or even let me know in the live chat. Would be great if you could. And we've got 23 votes so far. So yeah, let's try and get some more votes if we can. I can already see we've got 14 likes. Thanks for that, guys. Let's try and get up to 20 plus likes if we can in the next, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. That'd be great if we could. So yeah, make sure to smash that like button. Of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this, because we do qualifying, race watch-alongs, referee Grand Prix, plus weekend previews for every Grand Prix, and occasionally, we do reviews on a Monday, qualifying previews, all of that stuff. Yeah, make sure to sub to the channel for all that content. One thing I just wanted to go through was the weather forecast for the area where the Red Bull Ring is, Spielberg, Austria. And yeah, let me just go through the forecast with you guys. So at the minute, and this is the forecast I'm using, by the way, is BBC Weather, which is, in my experience, has proven to be the most reliable. Of course, you cannot have a totally reliable weather service because the weather forecasting, constantly evolves. So you can never be totally correct or even 90% correct when it comes to the weather. So the chance of rain tomorrow for qualifying. Qualifying takes place tomorrow at 5 p.m. local time. And at 5 p.m. local time tomorrow, the chance of rain is about 40%, it says here on BBC Weather. And then an hour later, drops to about 20%. So by the looks of it, if it is a wet start to the session, it will probably just continue to dry up. Maybe even just be a dry session with quite a bit of, threatening clouds around. One interesting thing to note is that the temperature for Friday is quite a bit warmer than on Saturday. So the chances for rain probably not as good on Friday as it is for Saturday. But yeah, for Friday qualifying, I'm not necessarily sure it is going to rain, but there is definitely a decent chance that it is. And then for Saturday, the sprint race starts at, I'm trying to think what time the sprint race exactly starts. I think it's 4:30 p.m. local time. And according to BBC Weather, the chance of rain at that time is about 50%. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. The temperature is a few degrees lower on Saturday compared to Friday and Sunday. Yeah, Saturday is probably the most likely day it's going to rain. The chance of rain before that part of the day, from 6 a.m. up until 2 p.m. is 70%. So the chance of rain diminishes as the day goes on, but doesn't mean it'll be, dry or dry enough to have a proper dry, a proper dry sprint race. To be honest, it'd probably be better to have a wet sprint race to make it more exciting and just entertaining in general. And then for Sunday, the race on Sunday starts at 3 p.m. local time, and the current chance of rain for Sunday is, at that particular time, is 60%. And looking through 3 p.m. local time until 5 p.m. local time, yeah, the chance of rain looks to be between 45% and 60%. So, really, for the most important sessions this weekend, which is Friday qualifying, Saturday sprint race, and then the Sunday proper main event race, the chance of rain throughout the weekend for those sessions looks to be really a 50-50. I think we'll definitely see wet sessions this weekend, but whether enough of the most important sessions are actually wet fully for the entire session, or if they're wet enough, who knows? We'll have to just see. But I don't think we can say categorically at the minute it's definitely going to be raining for this session, that session, so on and so forth, because it doesn't look to be, to me, as certain, the weather forecast. So, yeah, we will see how it plays out. Hopefully we do get some rain, but yeah, I don't want to sit here and, get ahead of myself and think, yeah, definitely it's going to rain, because if you start thinking like that, you'll get quite disappointed. But we'll see what happens on that front. But yeah, I think what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is I am going to go through some of the top teams, get into how I think, in more detail, how I think they'll get on this weekend. And then we will get into the car upgrades that have been shown on social media, such as McLaren, Ferrari, I think Alpine maybe as well on the front wing side. So yeah, we'll get into that soon. But let's start by going through the top teams. And of course, we'll start with Red Bull Racing. The last Grand Prix in Canada was their 100th win in Formula One. Quite incredible. Obviously, their first win was in Shanghai in 2009, April of 2009. And yeah, 14 years later, 100 wins in F1. Nobody thought they'd get 100 wins in that time. Absolutely no chance. Yeah, great achievement for them. Of course, they've won every race this season. They're the first team since Mercedes in 2019 to win the first 8 races of a Formula One season. I think the last team before that to win more than the first 8 races in a let me rephrase that. The last team before Mercedes in 2019 to win more than the first 8 races of an F1 season, I think, would be... You're probably going back to McLaren in 1988, I think, at that point. Yeah, I think you are probably at that point going back all the way back to then. So we'll see if Red Bull, if they can begin to match the 1988 McLaren team for absolute dominance when it comes to race wins. Of course, this Red Bull car not quite as quick as that McLaren car was relatively at the time compared to its competition. But yeah, for this weekend, it's not going to be a foregone conclusion. I know it's their home race, motivations will be high. This man, Austrian Max Verstappen, we know with so many Dutch fans at the circuit normally for this race, and with him being so good at this track, we know he's going to be on top form. But even despite that, it is not going to be a foregone conclusion that they are going to just easily blitz the entire weekend. Again, the teams behind them, Ferrari, Aston Martin and Mercedes, have definitely closed the gap to Red Bull since the start of the season. There is zero doubt about that. Ferrari, for a track like this, I think are most likely to put up a fight against the Red Bull team this weekend. So, given as well the short track, not track layout, the short, lap that we have here at the Red Bull Ring, I think Red Bull are going to have to be absolutely on top form, at least for most of the weekend, if they are to get the desired outcome, of course, which is a race win. Of course, didn't win this race last year. They did win the sprint race here in Austria last year, but they didn't get the absolute prized, not prize possession. They didn't, achieve what they truly wanted to, which was to win the proper Sunday race. And of course, we'll be trying to do that again. We'll start quickly with Sergio Perez when it comes to the drivers. With Perez, like I said, confidence is low. I don't see it really getting better this weekend, to be honest. I think we may see the small signs of improvement from Perez, as long as he's not feeling too many ill effects, no pun intended, from his whatever bug he has. But I think, yeah, at most you'll see small improvements from him this weekend, and then maybe a bit more at Silverstone next weekend for the British Grand Prix. But it's going to take a bit of time, really, for Sergio Perez to get back to what we saw at the start of the season, where he was super competitive and doing the job the Red Bull employ him to do. So yeah, I think Perez will struggle this weekend, like I've predicted. I think he'll be 7th in qualifying, a 7th in the race. And when it comes to Max Verstappen, it will take a monumental effort to beat Verstappen in both Friday qualifying and the Sunday race. There is zero doubt about that. And you'll basically need to be, as a team and driver, perfect to beat him this weekend, because we know Verstappen, his amazing speed and quality around this circuit. It's not just that he's amazingly quick here to Verstappen. It's that he is consistently, every time we come to this track, so unbelievably good. And that is what, not just with this particular racetrack, has made him so hard to beat in the last few years, but it's also what's making him a bit hard to even get near at the minute in 2023, because he is so brilliant and also so consistent that the others, still can't really get near enough to him to really hope to compete with him properly. So, yeah, we'll see what driver-team combination can be, most importantly, consistent enough throughout the entire weekend to put up a fight. My opinion, Leclerc and Ferrari will be the biggest challenger to Red Bull. I don't think Alonso and Aston Martin can put up enough of a fight, because I don't think Alonso is going to be fast enough in qualifying to get a high enough grid position, and that will really cost Alonso from having a chance to fight for the win on Sunday. Lewis Hamilton, this is not one of his best tracks. This is probably one of his weakest, and I don't think this is a great track really for Mercedes, and even for Aston Martin, it is not a great track for them. So really, if anyone out there is hoping that Red Bull's winning streak for 2023 is broken, I think your hopes, realistically, when you look at the certain teams' strengths and weaknesses with their cars, and also, the history of what drivers have done at this circuit, I do believe Leclerc and Ferrari have the best chance to topple Max and Red Bull this weekend. That's just, my view on, who I think has the opportunity to beat Max. Whether it will happen quite as much as I believe it can, a proper challenge being put up by the Ferrari team, we will have to see. I hope I'm not disappointed like I was in Spain, where in Spain I predicted Ferrari to be fighting for pole position and they ended up nowhere near pole position, wasn't even close. But ultimately I think Verstappen will win the race, even if he doesn't get pole position, ends up on second place and still on the front row, because Red Bull will have just a good enough car to keep him, or not to keep him, but for him to enable him to have the best pace out there on the track, and just enough pace, which is all he needs to be able to win the race. So yeah, I think Verstappen and Red Bull will still win the race and win the 9th race in 2023, which would be 9 wins in a row this year. And I think quite possibly, even most probably, this weekend will be the closest anyone has gotten to beating Red Bull in 2023. So, we'll see if I am right when it comes to that. But I do believe that will be the case. Let me know, of course, in the chat. Do you think Red Bull will dominate? Or do you think, do you think Ferrari possibly could take the fight to them? Or even Mercedes and Aston Martin? Let me know your reasons. Let's now go on to the Ferrari team. Ferrari have brought another minor upgrade this weekend, a new part to their, I think, front nose cone, which I'll show you guys very soon. So yeah, Ferrari, after what we saw in Canada and the, information that came from the tyre test, that they now understand a lot more how the car works with these Pirelli tyres, and also understand their new upgrade a lot more. Ferrari are in, when it comes to pure performance, they are in clearly a much better position. There is no doubt about that after what we saw in Canada. Helmut Marko keeps talking about how Ferrari were the fastest team in Canada. Not quite sure that is true, because it's a bit hard to say when you look at the race pace, as I looked at the day after the Canadian Grand Prix. It's hard to say absolutely that Ferrari had the pace to win the Canadian Grand Prix if they had a much better grid position, but their pace was very good. It was probably they were probably in the race when you adjust, the figures in terms of, there's obviously Ferrari at times compared to Red Bull had older tyres by a few laps, so on and so forth. Ferrari were probably the second best team in the race at the absolute worst, just a tad ahead of Aston Martin and Mercedes. And you definitely could argue they were as quick, if not quicker, in pure race pace terms than Red Bull. So yeah, massive positive for them. And I really hope they keep this up this weekend, because it would be great to see them rising up once again, because all we've seen this season is them, start off not too bad and just continuously fall down until really what we saw in the race in Canada, which was much more encouraging from the Ferrari team. So yeah, really fingers crossed for them this weekend that we do see further confirmation of this improvement. In my view, Charles Leclerc will be the main man for Ferrari this weekend. Let's go on to him now. Leclerc also is a brilliant driver around this circuit. Obviously had pole position here in 2019. Won this race last year brilliantly for Ferrari. Overtook Verstappen, I think, like 2 or 3 different times in the race. It was a brilliant race from him. His last win in Formula 1 to date. And Ferrari's last win, of course, to date as well. Let me go back to that picture. Yeah, so, Leclerc's always been super competitive here. One race especially that shows just how tremendous he is around this circuit is the 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, the first race of that season, where I still don't even know how he finished second in what was a severely underpowered and pretty shit Ferrari car. Yeah, so watch out for Leclerc this weekend. Always has been super competitive at the Red Bull Ring. And I think will just about take pole position because of Ferrari's great pace and their great straight line speed, which obviously is helped a lot by the grunt of their power unit. Carlos Sainz will be just a tad behind Leclerc, but I do think he'll still be competitive enough to give Red Bull and also, Mercedes and Aston Martin to a degree, quite a bit of pain this weekend. So yeah, Ferrari, I believe, will be at worst the second best team this weekend. Really hope what we saw in Canada was not an anomaly, because if it was, I'd be quite depressed if I was a Ferrari fan. If it turned out that that was just a one-off and it was really just dependent on the conditions that day, and maybe the track layout to a degree as well, I'd be very depressed if that was the case. But I don't think it will be, because if you look at this track and you compare it to the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, and also compare how both circuits tend to wear out tyres, they're kind of similar in how they wear out tyres, because here in Austria, you've got what, 2 or 3 fast corners. In Montreal, you've got about the same in terms of fast corners, but also you've got, in Montreal, quite a few slow corners. You've also got some slow corners here, turn 3, turn 4. Turn 1 is more of a medium speed corner. So it's kind of the same in terms of how much the tyres are worn out. And the tyre compounds this weekend are actually the same as what we saw in Montreal. It'll be the 3 softest compounds in the range that Pirelli have, the C5, C4, and C3 compounds. So they shouldn't be much worse off because of much worse tyre wear. They should be, in terms of managing their tyres, it should be about the same as what we saw in Canada. So I don't think they're going to be, back to where they were in Spain or what we saw in Miami a few weeks ago, where their race pace was horrible because they couldn't look after their tyres. I don't think we're going to see anything quite like that. But yeah, watch out for Ferrari. I think they're going to be Red Bull's main contenders. Really hope that it does turn out to be the case. Let's now go on to the Mercedes-Benz team, who, of course, in the last few weeks or so, they have improved a lot. Their new side pod, suspension upgrade, new basically car concept they have now is really working well for them. They are so much better for it. And obviously, they're now making up for lost time when they, should have started really the season with this car. And if they did start the season with this car, who knows where they would have been at the start of the season. They could have been maybe not as quick as Red Bull, but they could have been not that far away. And at this point, maybe right on Red Bull's pace, have they not given up a few months of time where they could have made this clear progress. But I think with what happened in Canada, obviously what we saw in Spain, was very encouraging. People thought, oh, Mercedes are now clearly the second best team. They're now going to be the ones to take the fight to Red Bull. After what we saw in Canada, I think those hopes have definitely been pegged back because Aston Martin clearly showed in the race that they were faster than Mercedes. Because Alonso was, obviously behind Hamilton for a very long time and was, not miles behind, of course. He was right on his gearbox, as I think. I just go to the other picture we just saw. Yeah, you can see here. Alonso was right on his gearbox for, 20-odd laps, and then eventually overtook him, pulled away from him a bit, and had great pace throughout the race. And I think Aston Martin have now just taken a slight step ahead of the Mercedes team. But it is right now very close between the two teams, and there is not that much to separate between Mercedes-Benz and Aston Martin. So yeah, it's a great fight that's going on right now for second in the championship, hopefully, which will be joined by the Ferrari team in the next few weeks as well. And hopefully we'll get proper confirmation that Ferrari are properly in that fight, say in the next couple of weeks, if they have a couple good races from this weekend and also Silverstone as well. But for this weekend, this is going to be a bit of an off weekend, I think, for Mercedes, because I just don't think their car overall, when you compare it to the strengths of the Red Bull and Ferrari car, I just don't think the Mercedes car is strong enough around this type of circuit to be fighting for, obviously, the race win or pole position. And necessarily, you could argue a podium might be a bit too hard for them to get at, especially with Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso being right in there and very competitive as well. And I think really for Mercedes, if you are awaiting them, fighting for a race win, I think it's a lot more likely for them to be able to fight for a win and maybe even win a race next weekend at Silverstone, which I think is a track that suits their car way more than than this track here in Austria. Because at Silverstone, even though it's high speed, it is a lot of corners, a lot of high speed corners. And we saw back in Spain, for example, and we have seen a lot of times with this Mercedes car, that in high speed corners, their car is very, very good. So, yeah, Silverstone, I do expect, and especially with two British drivers at their home Grand Prix, they should be very, very strong at Silverstone. So, yeah, this weekend, going to be a bit of a tougher weekend for them. As I said earlier, I think George Russell will be ahead of Hamilton because Russell very strong around this circuit. Lewis Hamilton is a bit weaker around this track. Still competitive, but this is not one of his stronger tracks. I think he would admit that because, plenty of times he's had teammates on his pace, if not beating him, around this circuit. So yeah, I think George Russell will be the number one driver for Mercedes this weekend in terms of who is the quicker Mercedes driver. And I think, yeah, he'll qualify fourth. Won't be quick enough, unfortunately, to get on the same pace, if not quicker, than the Ferraris. And then in the race, I do expect Aston Martin to have just a slightly quicker car, which is why I've gone for them finishing in 5th and 6th place. I really hope I am wrong and they are properly fighting for pole position. I really hope that's the case, but I just don't think this circuit layout is... I just don't think the circuit layout creates the environment for that to happen, if that makes any sense. And yeah, I think Silverstone, given it's Hamilton and Russell's home race, and given that the track layout suits their car much better, I think Silverstone is going to be maybe not their first win of the season, but it will be the closest they get. You know, it'll be the closest, not the closest they get, it'll be the closest they've been so far to a race win when we get to the British Grand Prix. I have no doubt about that. And of course, Mercedes have announced they are bringing quite a big upgrade, I think, to the side pod, floor, maybe with further upgrades to the suspension as well at Silverstone in a week's time. So, yeah, watch out for them next weekend. But for this weekend, not going to be the greatest weekend, I think, for the Silver Arrows. And let's go on to Aston Martin. Yeah, in Canada, they were in the dry, probably the third best team. Obviously, they ended up finishing second, but I do think Ferrari had a slightly better race pace than them. And I think, to be honest, they would probably even admit, when looking at the data, that Ferrari were just a tad quicker. But of course, Ferrari were, the reason they couldn't compete with Aston Martin and Mercedes for the podium was because Ferrari started too far back and gave themselves too much work to do to be able to fight for second and third. But for this weekend, kind of similar with them in terms of the way their car is, strengths and weaknesses wise, with Mercedes. I just don't think this is going to be one of those really stellar weekends for Aston Martin like we saw to a degree in Canada or in Monaco. I just don't think this is a circuit that really can see Aston Martin finishing, with Alonso second or even seriously challenging for the win on Sunday. I just don't think this is that type of track. I think Silverstone is a lot more likely of a circuit for them to be able to possibly win. Again, they're still one of the slowest teams in a straight line. That will cost them this weekend if there is any dry running at critical moments. In say Q2, Q3, that will really cost them quite a bit. And also, even though their car under braking and in slow corners is very, very strong, there isn't that many of them at this track. There's only, 2, maybe 3 of them, you could say, at this circuit. So yeah, I just don't think their car is really best suited for the circuit. And also we have to remember, this is not a great circuit for really either driver. Fernando Alonso has had a couple decent races here in the past, but nothing special. Alonso has never finished on the podium here, mainly because of the cars he's driven, not necessarily because he's not been good enough. But I mean, if you look at last year's race for Alpine, I think Ocon was genuinely faster than him during the weekend. And then if you look back at his McLaren Honda days, I think there was one weekend where Jenson Button was faster than him and finished, better than him. Yeah, it's just not one of Alonso's best tracks. He's still going to be competitive. He still have a decent weekend at the very least, but it's just not going to be, what we saw in Canada where he was performing at his absolute peak. And that's exactly the Fernando Alonso we want to see. And for Lance Stroll as well, this is not one of his better circuits. Not a terrible circuit for him. He's had a couple decent results here in the past, but just nothing special or amazing for the cars that he's driven. So yeah, I don't think Aston Martin are going to have the greatest weekend, and I don't think they'll finish on the podium. For Lance Stroll, He's really, his form at the minute is just awful. He is nowhere near his teammate and is performing nowhere near the standard he needs to really deserve to be at that team. And I think he'll continue in that vein of form this weekend, and I don't think he will qualify in the top 10 or score a point in the race on Sunday. For Alonso, like I said with my prediction, 5th, I think he'll be in qualifying, just ahead of Hamilton, purely because Hamilton is not that great at this circuit. And then in the race, I think he'll take 4th ahead of Russell, purely because the Aston Martin car and Alonso are a lot stronger in a race situation. So, yeah, that's what I think will happen on that front. And yeah, if they can get a podium, that would be great. That'd be a really, really good result, to be honest, considering this track is not going to be their greatest, and it's definitely not one of the best tracks that suits their car. So yeah, if they can get a podium, that would be great, but realistically, I don't think that's going to happen, despite Fernando Alonso's greatness and what we know he is able to do. And the final front-running team we'll go on to is Alpine, who, well, in Canada weren't a front-running team. They were a midfield team. Esteban Ocon had a good race weekend in Canada. He was, 6th in qualifying, I think? Yeah, 6th in qualifying, 8th in the race. And yeah, had a good weekend, but Alpine just turned out not to be very quick at all. And was the Alpine team were very disappointing. Because I thought, I didn't think they would have like an amazing result or anything, but I didn't think they would be that slow compared to the top 4 teams. They were quite a bit off, those teams, which quite unacceptable, really, given how in Monaco and Spain, their pace looked quite good. Also, Miami, their pace looked really quite good as well compared to those teams. It just, with Alpine, I think the reason their pace has dropped off in the last race, maybe, if you look at their developments, their upgrades, they have upgraded the car this season. They've had, a couple new front wings, slightly new redesign to the floor, which was only just a slight thing, and, slight new side pod. They've kind of fine-tuned their car with upgrades, but they've not brought anything that was massive. When if you look at Mercedes, obviously, they brought a massive upgrade. Aston Martin's upgrade that they brought in Canada was quite big. It was, a bit of a different shape on the side pod and a bit of a different floor. So, yeah, quite a big upgrade for them, and their first big upgrade of the season. Ferrari obviously brought a big upgrade in Spain with a new floor and side pod. With Alpine, it just doesn't feel like they've actually brought a big upgrade yet. It feels like they brought, smaller, again, fine-tuning type of developments that have improved the car, but just not enough for them to be really fighting on the same level at the minute with Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin, at least. Never mind Red Bull Racing. I do hope that Alpine are going to bring, a big upgrade soon. Maybe what they'll decide to do instead is just keep doing what they're doing and bringing small upgrades over a longer period of time, which, could work, but it's just going to take longer then for Alpine to get back to the level we saw from them, say, a month ago in Monaco, where, of course, they were, finishing on a podium. So, yeah, we'll see if Alpine can get back into the game with these developments, and whether they can get back to what we saw about a month ago from them, which was a lot more positive from the Alpine team. Do remember, though, that as of now, the ATR, which is the wind tunnel restrictions, the wind tunnel table, essentially, in terms of who can use the wind tunnel for, or what do you call it, aerodynamic testing, essentially, has reset based on the current championship standings as of basically right now. And yeah, as of right now, of course, Red Bull still will have the least amount because they are first, and then it will be Mercedes second, second least, Aston Martin third least, Ferrari fourth least. Alpine, though, are smack bang in the middle. So if they can use that bit extra wind tunnel time well, then yeah, maybe when we come back from the summer break, we'll see them a bit closer and back to where they were a month ago. But yeah, at the minute, it just feels like they've fallen away really because they've been outdeveloped. But that should, again, it should swing a bit more back towards Alpine's way in a couple months or so, where they have, you know, a bit more time to develop their car and use the wind tunnel a bit more. Than you know, the Mercedes and Aston Martin, and slightly more time, obviously, than the Ferrari team. Another thing to talk about with Alpine quickly as well is what is it? Ryan Reynolds has bought a 24% stake in the Alpine Group, I think it is, that operates the Alpine team. Of course, Ryan Reynolds, he owns and operates a football club in Wales, Wrexham. I'm sure some of you guys have probably heard about it if you follow football, you know, quite a lot. Yeah, so, you know, there's news about that, so maybe, you know, that investment might be able to help the Alpine team in the future. But yeah, Alpine for this weekend, like I said not a few moments ago, but quite a long time ago, really, in this stream. I think they'll be best of the rest. I still think they'll be quicker than McLaren, despite McLaren's new upgrade that is only running on Lando Norris's car. And the reason I think they'll be quicker is purely because Alpine have much better straight line speed. Of course, McLaren's new upgrade is aimed at really, or apparently, this is not confirmed, apparently this new upgrade for McLaren is aimed at the cutting the drag, which has been one big issue for them really since the start of these regulations in the, you know, start of last season. And this big reason why they've been, you know, so slow compared to what we saw back in 2021 when they had the opposite effect, McLaren, where they had a car that aerodynamically was good and was also very slippery in a straight line and obviously had a very powerful engine. So yeah, with Alpine and McLaren, it'll be close to a certain degree, but I still think Alpine will just about have the edge this weekend. But it's sure going to be interesting to see where McLaren properly are this weekend with that new upgrade again, only running on Lando Norris's car. And before I come to you guys in the chat, I am going to quickly get up on the screen some of the upgrades that the teams have brought that have been reported on. So I'll just try and get some of these up now to show them on screen, and then after that we'll come to you guys in the comments, or in the live chat rather. So yeah, let's get to this now. And obviously Albert Fabrega goes through these. Again, make sure to follow him on Twitter if you do have Twitter. A very good Twitter account. Yeah, let's get into these upgrades. So, more details of the new Ferrari floor. So, Ferrari, you know, redesign on the floor area. On the top here is the new floor. And you can see he's pointing to the areas that have been redesigned. Only slight differences in certain areas. A bit bigger differences in this area where you can see my mouse going around compared to the old one on the bottom. So, yeah, just a further redesign to that area. Of course, to go with that new side pod they had back in Spain. What is it? This is details of the new McLaren side pod. So, on the top here is the new entry to the side pod that you can see him pointing to here, and this is the old one, and you can see the way the entry looks and the way it funnels down is a lot more like the Red Bull one. It's a lot straighter and also a bit wider to me from this angle, it looks, than the old one McLaren had, which you can see here. So yeah, a bit more following on, again, the Red Bull side pod. Even Albert saying a bit of Aston Martin, a bit of Red Bull, and that's pretty much what the teams are going for in that area. Again, you can see here with the side pod, again, here on the top is the new one, and you can see here with how it drops down, that looks very much like the Aston Martin side pod, and this on the top here is the old one. You can see such a massive difference in that area. Now, this upgrade for McLaren, guys, is massive. This is probably the biggest upgrade they could bring. So this is, yeah, massive for them. And if it does, if it does show the improvements it should show, then they will be much better off for, this new upgrade. I do have to stress, though, because this circuit this weekend, it's a very short lap and that, the differences of this upgrade won't show as much at this circuit as it will, say, at Silverstone, where with the way that track layout is and how a bit longer the lap is, they'll be able to show off, I think, the improvements of this a bit more than what we'll see this weekend. And here again, you can see the way it, drops off, and it's almost like a water slide, the way it goes down and then back up. And like I said, it's very similar to the Aston Martin one we saw, especially at the start of 2023. And yeah, I'm very interested to see with McLaren how well that works for them. Here's another comparison. On the top here is the new side pod. It says here on this picture, Austria. And you can see just the way it drops down is a lot more straighter than the one on the bottom. So yeah, it's quite a big redesign to that area. Here is, was it Ferrari's nose tip vanity panel is also new. You can just see here, very slight difference on the very end of the nose cone. It's only a very slight thing. Of course, though, their new floor that they've brought is, really the big upgrade for them this weekend. Details of Ferrari's new front wing side plate. You can see here on the top, this is the Austrian version. You can see here the way it curves down like that and then shoots off. As you can see with my mouse there. When you compare it to the one on the bottom, it doesn't have that. So that's a new end plate, really, for the front wing. So a slight upgrade there. Nothing massive, but of course it will make a difference as long as it, correlates well to the actual track. And here's I think a further picture of it. Is there anything else? I don't think so. So yeah, those are the upgrades this weekend. So you've got new floor and new front wing end plate, really, for Ferrari, or side plate, whatever you want to call it. And then you've got, really, the biggest upgrade of the weekend, McLaren's new side pod and floor. Don't think the floor has been probably shown off yet, but I'm guessing that the floor has a bit of a difference to it as well, because normally when they redesign the side pod, they'll redesign the floor to go along with it, because they have to do it that way, as obviously both areas interact with each other very importantly for the way the car works. So yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how McLaren get on with that. And I really hope that we'll see a massive improvement in performance from McLaren when it comes to that, because it would be so great to see them, really back to what we saw in 2021, where they were really not that far away from being a regular race-winning team. I mean, they had plenty of races where they were, on the podium. There was plenty of races where they were not even that far away from pole position. Lando Norris was consistently finishing in the top 5 of races. They weren't that far away from being, a front-running team. So I really hope they can get, back to really, like I said, how they were in 2021, which would be at least, if they ended the season like that, that would be, I think, acceptable for McLaren fans, and would be definitely acceptable going forward for 2024 and 2025, because then, of course, they can keep improving and possibly get even better in those seasons. But anyway, that's all the teams so far. Of course, I'll go through the rest of the teams soon. And those are the upgrades that I've just gone through. Let me now come to you guys in the live chat. Before I do, though, just a quick reminder of what my next 2 pieces of content are. Tomorrow, I will be live from 2:30 p.m. UK time. That's 1.5 hours before qualifying starts for the qualifying watch-along. Of course, obviously, the qualifying session, it decides the grid for Sunday's race. So it's a very important session. And if you can join me, make sure to do so. And I'll be live all the way until 5:30 p.m. And then on Saturday, I'll be live firstly for the F2 sprint race, and then I'll be doing then the build-up and a watch-along for the F1 sprint race. And I'll be live from 12:30 p.m. UK time all the way through till 4:30 p.m. So make sure, guys, to join me for that. And of course, my Sunday stream as well, covering the race preview and watch-along as well. But, yeah, let's go back to these pictures and let's get to your comments in the chat. And as well, remember, there is a poll running in the chat where I've asked you guys what team is most likely to challenge Red Bull this weekend at the Austrian Grand Prix. Let me know who you think is most likely to put up a fight. Yeah, let me go back to the chat and read out some of the best comments we've had so far. Sparky Pete says, Max made me so much money last few races. Think it's still a safe pick. Red Bull been holding back. Max is great in the wet too. I still disagree with people saying that Red Bull have been holding back. I mean, there has been certain races where I do believe that they have been holding back a bit more, quite a bit more than other races. I think there's definitely been races like that. The Spanish Grand Prix is the most recent one where I thought Red Bull held back quite a bit in the race, and Max could have won that race by an extra 15 seconds if he wanted to. Obviously, he won it still by, I think, 23 seconds. But it is impossible to know whether Red Bull, have been holding back or not. We will never truly know. We can only guess by, the lap times based on what they normally do. Greg Martinez, will Checo race this week? We'll have to see. I've not heard anything. I'm guessing he probably will, because I would have heard some rumors already, probably on social media, if there was a replacement being lined up, whether it was Ricciardo, Lawson, Tsunoda, whatever. Yeah, so I think he will be fine. Polish Eddie Bro, who would replace him if anything? Probably, to be honest, I'm not sure exactly who would replace him. Red Bull's reserve driver, let me just look. I think officially Red Bull's reserve driver is Ricciardo, but I don't think that necessarily means that he will be the replacement, because they don't necessarily do it based on that. Well, on Wikipedia, it doesn't say exactly that, who their reserve driver is. All it says is test drivers: Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson, Dennis Hauger, and Zane Maloney. Of course, Hauger and Maloney wouldn't replace him. So yeah, it'd be either Ricciardo, Lawson, or Tsunoda. Honestly, I would, if you're going to replace Perez, I'd probably give it to Tsunoda, because I think he is the most likely to put in the best performance, given that he's obviously been racing in F1 this season. Lawson's been racing in Japan in Super Formula, and, we'll have to make quite the trek to get to Austria, or from wherever he is in the world at the minute, to, get to the Red Bull ring, and hasn't driven an F1 car that much. And Daniel Ricciardo, I mean, he's been doing simulator work, but we don't know if he's actually anywhere near the pace that Red Bull need him to be at to be properly competitive. So, yeah, I think the best option would be Tsunoda, and then just stick Lawson or Ricciardo in the AlphaTauri. Josiah says, I refuse to call turn 3 anything other than turn 2. Lol, yeah. Yeah, we all know it's turn 2, but, officially there is a turn before turn what is officially turn 3. Josiah also saying, I don't know why, but Ricciardo replacing Perez triggers me. I don't think he deserves it. Yeah, you could argue that. I mean, if you want, let me know why you think he doesn't deserve it, but there's definitely an argument to be made that, Lawson or even Tsunoda deserve, to fill in as a replacement more so, for a race than Ricciardo. But again, it's up for debate, really, on that. Mickey says, I see Max on pole by 2/10 over Perez in second. I don't think it'll be quite that easy for Red Bull. McLaren F1 racer sprints in F1, in my opinion, is a bit like the tackiness of WWE. It comes about to keep the attention of the newbies that Liberty has acquired off Drive to Survive. I hope F1 evolves again soon. I mean, yeah, it plays into, really, the crowd they gained from the Drive to Survive show. And I mean, from a pure marketing point of view, I completely understand why they brought the sprint race in, because to the casuals or newbies who don't really know that much about motorsport, never mind Formula One, sprint races as an idea to the casuals or the to the proper motorsport or even F1 newbies, the idea of a sprint is a lot more interesting and exciting to them, because I don't think they truly understand how it works and also truly understand why it is bad, and why it really messes with the race weekend. And from a more casual point of view, obviously having an extra race, even though it's a shortened race, it gives you the chance to see the cars race side by side. That is visually appealing to people who are not as interested in Formula One. So, I completely understand why Liberty Media have gone for the sprint race. From a marketing point of view, it makes total sense. But from a sporting point of view, it's not made the race weekend any better. In fact, with the way, or with the format they've gone with now, where the sprint race now doesn't decide the grid for Sunday's race, now it just has no meaning, or it just doesn't feel like it matters, really. It's just a pointless race with a few extra points on the board. Which, yeah, it just doesn't add anything to the weekend. I mean, we saw in Baku, it added 0 to the race weekend. Let's find some other comments here if I can. Sparky Pete says, Mercedes car was never supposed to be the second best in Canada. It was supposed to be a weak track to its characteristics. True. Yeah, true, to a certain degree. I think most of why Mercedes were competitive in Canada was really, or not, maybe not most of why they were competitive in Canada, but a lot of it was to do with Lewis Hamilton's, amazing speed at that track. And I think that's a big reason why he was so competitive, Hamilton, and well, not Hamilton, but that's why Mercedes were maybe quite a bit closer to Aston Martin than maybe they truly were, because Lewis Hamilton was, having one of those days when he was on absolute top form, really, because he was at a circuit where he is just so amazingly good. McLaren F1 races, Chaz, I'm keeping you to that statement, lol. Mercedes 1-2 at Silverstone. Don't care which order. I'll personally seek you out and buy you beers, mate. Yeah, I'd be amazed if we saw that. But if their upgrades that come at Silverstone do work, I mean, given how incredible Lewis is also at Silverstone, I think definitely it's possible that we could see Red Bull's streak being broken at Silverstone. And I think if Mercedes' upgrades do work, I think it's more likely to be broken, their winning streak this season, at Silverstone than it is this weekend. Because despite Ferrari's pace being a bit better than what we saw at the start of the season, given the upgrades or just the improvements they've made in general in the last, 3 or 4 weeks, it's still Ferrari. Even if they've got the fastest car, you still don't trust them, do you? Quite enough to get the results they should. So, yeah. Silverstone should be a very exciting weekend to see where the Mercedes are fighting for victories again. And I think that's pretty much all of the comments, or the best comments I could find in the chat. Thank you guys for commenting. Of course, make sure to keep posting in the chat your thoughts, and I'll leave that poll running. I can see we're on 22 likes, by the way. Cheers for that, guys. If there is anyone watching who has not hit the like button yet, then make sure to do so. Let's try and get up to 30 plus likes if we can by the end of the stream. But yeah, we're not too far away from the end of the stream, because now we're going to whiz through the rest of the teams, and then that will be it. So, talking of the McLaren team, let's go on to them now. So yeah, massive upgrade for Lando Norris, a new side pod and new floor, I think, to go with it as well. Of course, tomorrow we will find out official confirmation from the FIA as to who has brought exactly what upgrades, so I will make sure to go through that list with you guys on Friday in the build-up to qualifying tomorrow, because it'll be interesting, of course, to see exactly what teams have brought. But yeah, I'm really, fingers crossed and hoping that this upgrade does do a lot for their performance, because where McLaren have been in the last, maybe not the last 18 months necessarily, but especially, the last, or just this year really in general, has been nowhere near good enough. I mean, for Alpine to finish on the podium this season just illustrates how poor McLaren have been, because McLaren, I don't think, really have an excuse to be worse than Alpine, especially now in Formula 1 we have, a budget cap and all of that stuff, and obviously McLaren have, at the minute, a bit more wind tunnel time than Alpine will have for the rest of the season, so I don't think McLaren have got really that much of an excuse. So, massive improvements need to be made. There was an improvement in Baku, but it wasn't quite enough for McLaren to be really, fighting Alpine, say, on a regular basis. This upgrade, once it's applied to both cars at Silverstone, should be enough for McLaren to fight Alpine. If it still isn't, then I'm pretty much at the point of giving up with this team, honestly, because they can't afford to, to keep having so many false dawns, which it feels like they've been having really since the start of 2022. So yeah, really fingers crossed this works for them, because if it does, then not only have we got 5 front-running teams, we've got another one, McLaren, who, with a much better driver lineup. Yeah, you could argue much better driver lineup in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. If they've got a car as quick, if not quicker than the Alpine, there's more possibility for McLaren to get maybe even more consistent good results than what Alpine have been getting this season. Because with Alpine, obviously had a podium, that was a great result. They've had a couple other, good results this season, but I still feel like, as I've explained before with Alpine, still feel like there's been some races where they could have had a few more points if their drivers had not been as shit or been a bit more consistent during the weekend. Lando and Oscar this season have been pretty consistent, and I do think are 2 better drivers in terms of talent and speed. Whether they are truly, Lando definitely is better than Ocon and Gasly. Whether Oscar is, we'll have to see really in the next few months and really the next year or so to see how good properly Oscar is in Formula 1. But I think McLaren's driver lineup without doubt has more potential. and has the potential then to, to really compete with maybe Mercedes or Aston Martin at particular races if they're not having those teams the greatest weekends. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing what McLaren can do. My guess, and it can only be a guess at this point because we've not seen any data from the weekend to suggest that McLaren's upgrade has truly improved their car, or by how much it's improved their car, we don't know that yet. From my guess, I think it will improve their car by quite a bit of time. But for this weekend, because again, it's a short lap, I don't think it's going to improve their car quite enough for them to be, fighting for like a top 5 grid position or anything crazy like that. But Lando, I think, will be in the top 10 in 9th place, and I think he will hang on for a point, really, only because Lando is so amazing at this circuit, and that's why I believe he will end up in the top 10 in qualifying of the race. Silverstone should be a better showing of McLaren's improvements, and I think that will be a very interesting race weekend to see just where they now stand after this really big upgrade for them, for the, the upgrade obviously for the side pod and the floor. So yeah, fingers crossed. Really hope this upgrade works for them. Like I said, Norris, I think, will grab a point for the team. Piastri will be probably, I don't know, 13th, something like that, 13th, 14th. And the only reason I say that is because, of course, he's not running the updated package. And because Lando is so amazing here, I think he's going to struggle really to get anywhere near his teammate to be properly competitive with him. So, yeah, Norris should be the man for McLaren. And McLaren, I think, will end up in the top 10. Let's hope. My prediction is quite conservative for them. And let's hope that they're, quite a bit better than that. Because if they are, then we are, of course, the beneficiaries. Because then we'll get a much more exciting season with yet another team added into the mix. For the final few teams, Alfa Romeo, obviously Bottas had a good race in Canada, finishing in the points despite what he did on the final lap where he defended fresh air into the final chicane and essentially opened the door for Lance Stroll to overtake him on the exit, the final chicane, and then beat him to the line, which was, a move out of Giancarlo Fisichella's playbook from Suzuka 2005, how to defend fresh air and end up getting overtaken because of it. But yeah, it was a good race for Valtteri, very good race weekend. Was a lot more back to what we really expect him to be doing in that car, at least compared to his teammate. And of course, we know this circuit is a special circuit for Valtteri Bottas. Won here twice in 2017 and 2020. In 2018, I think also he had pole position in that race and was running in second until his car failed. And yeah, 2017 had pole, 2020 had pole. 2019 was running in second place, if I remember, in that race for a bit. Yeah, he's just always been really competitive here. And he was, for a time, consistently matching, if not consistently beating Lewis Hamilton on pure pace around the Red Bull ring. So Valtteri, if that Alfa Romeo car is performing well, Valtteri is absolutely a man to be feared in that midfield fight. So we'll watch out to see truly where he will sit. My feeling is really Alfa Romeo need it to be dry if they're going to get a good result, because I feel as though in the wet they're not quite as strong. Zhou Guanyu, though, has got to improve, because what we saw in Canada was really quite poor. He was not just slower than Bottas, he was miles behind Bottas really the entire weekend. And you can't give me the excuse of, oh, it was his first ever weekend at that circuit. It wasn't. He obviously finished in the top 10 in qualifying of the race at that circuit in 2022. So you can't give me that excuse there. And, this weekend, obviously, he's had plenty of experience around this track, and he has got to be not necessarily quicker than Valtteri, but he needs to be really on the pace of him. If you're slower than Valtteri, fine, but don't be 2-3 tenths slower around a track this or a lap this short, you've got to be really within a tenth, or maybe a tenth at most slower than him. But that would be an acceptable gap between Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Because as far as I'm concerned at the minute, Zhou Guanyu, I know he finished in the points in Spain and had a great race. I think he finished in the points in Australia, but that was mainly because of the retirements we had, not really because he was quick enough to actually finish in the top 10. Really, when you look at this season, Zhou has not really done anything much of note, except really for, what we saw in Spain, which was, a good weekend. Full credit to him for that weekend. But other than that, he's not really done anything that stands out in my mind where I can point to and say, what a weekend this was, and, etc. So, need to see a proper step up of improvement from him, because there is still the threat of him losing that seat. Obviously, next year, Alfa Romeo becomes Sauber. Teo Pourchaire being part of the Sauber Academy, still a threat down there in F2, because if Teo does win the F2 championship, I do think Sauber will look to move Teo into Zhou's seat, because Teo is, I still think, at least more talented than Zhou, and if he does win the F2 championship, I think then that'll be enough proof that Teo is probably better than Zhou as well. So I need to see some proper improvement from Zhou Guanyu, because he just isn't performing well enough right now, really, to deserve a Formula One seat. Really, I mean, if you look at this season so far, the drivers that have been not really F1 quality with their performances, really, Zhou, not every race has been, poor. There's been a couple other races where he's been on the pace, if not slightly quicker than his teammate, which has been, decent weekends for him. But really, the only three drivers I can think of that have been not really close to their teammates in those midfield teams are Zhou, De Vries, and Sargent. With Sargent, I give him a bit more of a pass because it's his first season in Formula One, and also because a lot of the tracks that he's racing at, he's never raced at before. And he's not, making really any mistakes. He just is having, to learn on the fly some of these tracks. When you compare that to Nick De Vries, for example, it's Nick's first season in Formula One, but he's making too many mistakes, which is why he is on the hot seat, and that ass of his is getting burnt to death at the minute. It's that hot. The seat at AlphaTauri. So I just need to see more. What I need to see more importantly is not just him matching Bottas or being quicker than him, because we've seen that a couple times this season. What I need to see is him doing that consistently, because that's what Formula One, if you're going to properly succeed in Formula One, whether it is as a midfield driver, a driver for a top team, or, if you're like a number 2 driver at a top team, like a support driver, or if you are an absolute top driver, the absolute one thing you need to succeed is consistency. And that is one thing that this guy lacks, is consistency. The performance is there, he just cannot do it consistently. That is what I need to see. I need him to be consistently matching Bottas. Not every single weekend, literally, but, 90-95% of the time, he has to be matching Bottas. He cannot be one weekend quicker, and then the next weekend he's nowhere near him. And then a couple more races, he's, again, nowhere near him. And then occasionally will be quicker than him. And that's just not acceptable. Consistency is the most important factor for a driver. All the drivers are talented, incredibly talented, are very, very quick. There's no doubt about that. But what separates the best from the absolute worst in Formula One is consistency. So I need to see a bit more from him. and we'll hopefully see that this weekend. We have definitely seen a bit more consistency from this driver lineup at the Haas F1 team. Have recently heard news that Haas are probably going to be keeping their driver lineup for 2024. Looks like Magnussen and Hülkenberg are essentially all signed up for next year, which is good to see. Magnussen has not had a great season, really. It's been a bit disappointing as Magnussen, but he's not been as egregious as others. Like a Nick de Vries, for example, in 2023. Magnussen still has had 2 or 3, good races. He just needs to sort out his consistency because his speed is definitely there. Nico Hülkenberg, of course, has been super great this season. Very consistent in qualifying, but the issue for him has nothing to do with him in terms of why he has not been able to convert those great qualifyings into points is because of the car. They can't look after their tyres. They have horrible race pace, as we've seen for the last few years. It's a never-ending issue for the Haas F1 team. That's going to, even if they have a great qualifying this weekend, it's going to hamper them, unfortunately, once again. So, I think Haas will be just outside the top 10. Maybe they'll just sneak into the top 10, but they're not going to finish the points because, again, they will slip down the order and be one of the worst teams in the field, as they normally are. And it's such a shame because if Haas had one of the best cars in terms of pace in the race from the midfield pack, then Hülkenberg would be easily in the top 10 of the championship right now, because Hülkenberg he's got to Q3 almost every single race weekend this season. So it's really a shame that they've not been able to supply their 2 drivers a car that can consistently and realistically fight for points every weekend. Because, the pace has been quite strong from what we've seen on the Saturday. Yeah, it's a shame. But, when it comes to the driver lineup at Haas F1, it's the right decision to keep both drivers. Hülkenberg has been amazing on his return. Been so strong for the Haas team. He's been exactly... Maybe it's a bit too harsh to say he's been exactly what Mick wasn't in 2022. But he's delivered the things that Mick couldn't deliver in 2022. Which is, again, like I just talked about with Joe, consistency. Because Mick, he also had the performance. And I still believe, to a degree, Mick deserved to keep his seat. But, again, he didn't have the consistency that Hülkenberg has shown this season. Mick would too often be, have one weekend or a couple weekends where he's very quick, and then another 2 weekends where he was absolutely nowhere near the pace and just shockingly bad. You can't be like that in Formula One. You're not gonna succeed if you're like that. And that's why for Haas, their prospects have definitely improved with their driver lineup, and be good to see them sign both drivers up for another year in 2024, where hopefully they give them a bit more of a raceable car on a Sunday. But for this weekend, I just don't see them as top 10 contenders, really. Given certain teams' improvements as well, McLaren and Williams, I think the midfield fight is becoming a bit too tough for them compared to a few weeks ago. So I think it's going to be just a bit too tough for them to be able to be in the top 10. On to AlphaTauri, who are not going to be AlphaTauri for that much longer because, guys, Helmut Marko has announced that AlphaTauri, as the team name, will be no more. They will be having a new name in 2024, whether it's Toro Rosso or a new brand name, who knows? But the AlphaTauri name will be dead after the final race in Abu Dhabi. Which, you can let me know what you think in the chat, guys, of the AlphaTauri name. I've not really minded it. I honestly looking back, I prefer, honestly, if they were still Toro Rosso, because I really liked the liveries they had. Also, the name, I just think, is a lot cooler sounding than AlphaTauri. A lot of people as well pronounce it wrong and say AlphaTauri, which doesn't bring up good thoughts, especially if you're British. But yeah, I do hope that they just go back to Toro Rosso, because I would honestly, with these cars, the way they look, I'd like to see that old, not the old Toro Rosso livery, but the Toro Rosso livery we saw back in like 2018, 2019. I think it would look pretty good on these cars, and visually would be more striking, because I have never been that big of a fan of the AlphaTauri cars. I know a lot of people, when they initially debuted their car, were massive fans of the way they looked, but I've never been big fans of them in terms of the look. With the color scheme, it looks a lot more similar to like a BMW Sauber back in the mid to late 2000s. Which, I mean, the BMW Saubers weren't bad looking, but they were really, the only reason they were that decent looking was really because of the way the shape of the car was, more so than the livery color, and all of that stuff itself. So yeah, I've not really been that big of a fan of the color scheme. And yeah, I would prefer Toro Rosso, absolutely. But let me know in the chat what you think their new name will be. And what livery you'd like to see, whether you'd like to see them go back to the old Toro Rosso livery, which would be just an alternate version of what we saw with Red Bull, like we saw back in the days when they were Toro Rosso. But for this weekend, AlphaTauri, I just don't see them having a competitive weekend. One thing we are seeing at the minute is, so, they did make some improvements a few weeks ago with their car, but now Williams have brought a massive upgrade. Now McLaren have brought a massive upgrade. They've been really just outdeveloped at this point, and with them last in the championship, and with this car being just so, not so terrible, it's not like a 2019 Williams or anything, but it's just not a good car. It's just a very meh type of F1 car. It's not shit enough to be a 2019 Williams, but it's not good enough to be like, an AlphaTauri car from a couple of years ago, where they were, regularly sitting in the top 10 in qualifying and races. It's just not very good, really, at all. Not really got any strengths. I mean, they're stronger in certain areas than other teams, but that doesn't necessarily mean those areas are strong for them. It just means they're stronger. And yeah, it's just a very mid car, really. Tsunoda hopefully keeps up his good form. There's a bit of a shame in Canada with Tsunoda, because I had to pit on the first lap for damage. I know he started far down, but I remember AlphaTauri's dry running pace in practice was really good with their race pace, so I would have been very interested to see, if he didn't have that damage, whether he could have maybe nicked a point and maybe done what Albon did in the Williams. I think he still came home, Tsunoda, to finish in like 13th place, which was a pretty good result, despite what happened to him. But for Nick De Vries, or DeMid, whatever you want to call him, of course that was a term that Nib came up with, and it is absolutely bang on. De Vries is currently the worst driver in Formula 1. There is zero doubt about it. It's not necessarily that he is the absolute slowest, it's that he has... Consistency is not a thing with him. He makes way too many mistakes. What he did in Canada was so stupid, with the dive bomb on Magnussen. Just a really... the type of thing you would see in F2 or F3, just not really F1 worthy type of driving from De Vries. But it's been the case really since he began in Formula 1. Just too many mistakes, basic errors as well, hitting the back of people, just simple, very simple basic errors. And at the minute, his seat is absolutely up for grabs, because Helmut Marko doesn't sound like he's very keen on him continuing much longer because De Vries is clearly nowhere near his teammate Tsunoda. I know Tsunoda. Sorry, Tsunoda has had a good seat. Let me repeat that. I know Tsunoda. Bloody hell, my throat. Yeah, I know he's had a good season so far, but Nick De Vries is making Yuki Tsunoda look like the second coming of Ayrton Senna. That's how bad De Vries has been this season. Tsunoda's had a good season, don't get me wrong, but he's not that great. But again, it's just De Vries is really making him look, quite special. So it is time probably to replace him. If if this weekend's race and the race at Silverstone, if he continues with his awful driving and basic mistakes, then I would get rid of him. And then your options at that point are either Liam Lawson or Daniel Ricciardo. Probably should be Lawson, but the one thing I will say, because there are rumours that I saw a few days ago that Daniel Ricciardo, because he's in the simulator a lot, they are evaluating Red Bull whether he would be good enough to go into that car, the AlphaTauri car, and perform to the level that really he should perform at in that car. If Ricciardo can clearly illustrate in the simulator that he can get back to the Ricciardo of 2020 when he was one of the best drivers in the world, without a doubt, then they should put Ricciardo in that car instead of Lawson. But if if the evidence is not there to say that Ricciardo absolutely can get back to that level, then I would go with Liam Lawson, because I think that would be long-term a better option for the team. But if Ricciardo does, in the simulator, get back to that type of level where he is back to his peak confidence, peak performance and driving, then I think you have to go for Ricciardo, because no matter how good Liam Lawson is in his F1 career or his motorsport career, he'll never be as good as what Ricciardo was at his peak. No disrespect to Liam. He's a good driver. There's no doubt about that. He's a very good driver. But Ricciardo, like I said, at his peak, which was really between 2014 and 2020, Ricciardo was one of the top few drivers in the world. And in 2020, I thought was, in Formula One, he was in the top 3 best drivers, just after Hamilton and Verstappen. So, interesting decision. Let me know in the chat, should it be Ricciardo, should it be Lawson? But for me, that's what I would base my decision on, is if Ricciardo cannot get back to the level he was at 3 years ago, then go for Lawson. But if Ricciardo can, and the evidence is clearly there to show that Ricciardo can produce that performance, then despite being a lot older, Ricciardo should absolutely get the opportunity. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, this weekend, AlphaTauri are not going to be contending for the top 10 or the points. They will need a miracle from Tsunoda to perform one of his, amazing drives again, where he produces pace that we just never expected or thought possible. We will see, we will see if that, does materialize, but most likely, I don't think it will. And finally is Williams, and thankfully, after Alex Albon's brilliant result with that new upgraded car, Logan Sargent man on screen will now run that upgrade, and we should start to see, really from now until the Italian Grand Prix at Monza with Logan. I'll just go back to him if I can. There you go. We should start to see now he's racing at tracks where he has lots of experience, we should start to see Logan, show what he is really about, what he can do at Williams and in Formula One. So if you're a Logan Sargent doubter, maybe, and you don't think he's good enough for Formula One, make sure to pay extra attention in these next few races, because I think we'll see properly what his level is right now in the next, 2 months or so. And then we can probably, once the European season ends, I think that we can probably judge where Logan Sargent is and whether he is truly good enough to be in Formula One. Because, of course, there are constant rumours about, Mick Schumacher taking up the Williams drive, even though I don't think that's going to happen realistically for next season. Yeah, I just don't see that happening, because I don't think Williams are that keen to move Logan on. I think they want to at least give Logan next season as well. Remember, Logan is a very talented driver. Was, I believe, very close to winning the Formula 3 championship in 2021 or 2020? Let me just have a look quickly. Because I do believe there has been some unfair chatter about Logan this season, because I think people are not adding in the context of, some of the racetracks he's raced at so far this season. He's never raced at before. And I think also people don't quite understand just, how talented he is. So last year in F2, he finished 4th in the championship, won a couple races, and yeah, he was really in the mix after, Drogovic and Pourchaire, who were the main drivers fighting for the championship. But yeah, in Formula 3 in 2020, he lost out to Oscar Piastri by 4 points. And really, the only reason he lost out was because he retired from the final race in Mugello, when Oscar finished 7th and Théo Pourchaire finished in 3rd. And that's really why, again, Logan ended up losing the F3 title, was because of just that one bad final race. And also in Monza, he had 2 really bad results there. So really lost it because of some bad luck at the very end of the season, rather than just being outdone by better drivers at the time. I mean, I still believe Oscar Piastri is a better driver than Logan, because I think Oscar has improved even more since then. Obviously, Oscar won the F2 championship then in 2021, which is a bit better than what Logan did. But yeah, I just want to dispel this talk of Logan just not being good enough and not being talented enough for Formula One. I think absolutely Logan is. Let me put it this way. For one, he's good enough to at least try out in Formula One to see if he's good enough. He's earned that opportunity. I mean, you can ask Oscar Piastri, Théo Pourchaire, Liam Lawson, drivers he's raced with recently, what they think of him, and they'll say that he's a very good racing driver, and he's on his day very, very competitive and can be definitely a good Formula One driver. I'm pretty sure they would say that about him. But as well, when you look at his talent, he's not just on the grid because he's American and the owners of Formula One are American. I mean, obviously that does help Liberty Media to a degree, but not really that much, because Americans only care about their sportsmen if they're actually winning. And obviously Logan is currently racing for one of the worst teams in Formula One and hasn't even scored a point yet. So he's not really going to get much attention from the Americans anyway because of that. So it's not just an American thing as to why he's got this chance. His talent has deserved an opportunity, and I just think we need to give him a bit extra time. Like I said, let's see how he does in the rest of these European races compared to Albon with this new upgraded car, and then we'll judge him to see whether he is truly good enough. So yeah, let's give it a bit of time. But yeah, with Williams now, with both cars having the upgrade, Alex Albon obviously was amazing in Canada. What a weekend that was! He was was it 8th on the grid or 9th on the grid after qualifying, and then finished obviously 7th, doing a one-stop strategy. Just a brilliant race from him and the Williams team. And obviously this circuit this weekend is a brilliant track for Williams. Now, I know I've not predicted them to finish in the top 10, in qualifying or the race, that's only because I think McLaren and Norris will, be too strong of a package because of McLaren's upgrades and because Lando is so good at this circuit. But if Lando or even Pierre Gasly are not good enough to finish in the top 10 in the race at least, look out for Williams, and especially, and I'll go back to him again, Alex Albon. Look out for him because he will be right there, at least fighting to get into Q3 in tomorrow's qualifying session. And I think on Sunday, as long as he's starting in the top 12, 13 on the grid, I think he absolutely has a good chance of finishing in the points. Williams is the best car in a straight line. Aerodynamically, their car has improved a lot with this new upgrade to the side pod, the floor, and there's so many areas of the car have improved as well. So, yeah, you've got to look out for Williams this weekend. They are really, I'd say, for the entire field, the dark horse for a really good surprise result. Kind of what we saw in Canada. Yeah, watch out for them. They should have definitely a competitive weekend in terms of their performance. But guys, that is it for this weekend preview. And yeah, I think I'll cut the stream to a close there. Just a reminder again, what the schedule is. Tomorrow, I will be live at 2:30 p.m. UK time. That is 1 hour after the conclusion of practice 1 and 90 minutes before the start of qualifying for the qualifying watch-along, running through until 5:30 p.m. And then on Saturday, I'll be live at 12:30 p.m. UK time for firstly the F2 sprint race watch-along. Then after that, we'll be building up to the F1 sprint race and doing a watch-along for the sprint as well. Of course, Sunday will be the race preview and race watch-along as usual. Just to let you know as well, the qualifying watch-along tomorrow, the build-up will involve me going officially through the upgrades once the FIA releases their official list of who has brought what new parts and all of that, like we normally do. We'll go through that. We'll go through the data of practice 1 and who was good in what sector, the sector time data, and obviously look at the results, and obviously get into a bit more of a comprehensive build-up to qualifying than we say normally do when we're actually building up directly into the session. So make sure to join me tomorrow, guys, for the start of the weekend. And again, a very important session to start the weekend with qualifying, deciding the starting grid for Sunday's race. But yeah, thank you guys for coming along to this stream. It'd be great to have you along. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. Before you go, guys, smash that like button. We're currently on 26 likes. Let's try and get up to 30 likes or more. Let me just quickly finish up the poll in the chat where I asked you guys what team is most likely to challenge Red Bull this weekend at the Austrian Grand Prix. And you guys voted for Mercedes as most likely with 43% of the vote. Aston Martin second with 34% of the vote, and Ferrari third with 21% of the vote. I disagree, but yeah, we'll see if you guys turn out to be correct or not. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. We'll see. Yeah, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe. And also, if you want to keep up the content on this channel, make sure to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5. And also, you can do so, keeping up the content on this channel and getting notifications for content by joining the Discord server. Link below in the description and also in the live chat. I'm sure it's being posted at the minute. Not only so you can get notifications for my content, but also we have over 500 members in that server. Would be great for you to join our community. But guys, until qualifying tomorrow for the Austrian Grand Prix at 2:30 p.m. UK time, I'll be starting my coverage. Until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.